Hey guys, this is the second video in my Selenium tutorial series. We're going to be going over how to find elements on web pages as well as how to interact with those elements. Now, most of these tutorials I've seen, they basically just do a really simple web page and it really doesn't teach you much. For this video we're going to be using Reddit, which has a lot of more advanced stuff. They deliberately try to make it hard to automate using their website, so we're going to have to use a variety of beginner and advanced techniques to make this work. What we're going to do is we're going to go automate how to log in, and we're also going to automate scraping all the post titles on the home page. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to want to reuse code. There's no point for Selenium projects. When you start off, you're almost always going to use the same batch of code. So we're going to use this code we got from our first video, and we're just going to paste this right here. We can get rid of this for now, but the core of what we're going to do is always you're going to create your WebDriver and you're going to go to a website. So we can remove Google and go to reddit.com, and we're also going to leave this for now so that we don't close out of our browser right away. So let's just run this real quick. Whoops, typo. And if this runs right, we'll be at Reddit, and first thing we want to do is basically kind of plan out how, find the elements and plan out what we're going to do. So if we maximize this, the first thing we're going to do here is, actually, before we look at our elements and all that, we're going to make sure we do two things, which is a good thing to learn as well, which is we're going to mess with our configuration options for Selenium. So as you can see, right when we open this up, we get this notification, which is a pain to deal with Selenium unless we change the configuration options. And we're also going to get rid of this Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So we're going to click out of this, and what we're going to do is import our WebDriver options. So .chrome.options. What this allows us to do is basically kind of customize some stuff with how Chrome starts up. So we can start off maximized, we can get rid of those notification bars, stuff like that. You can also run it in headless mode, so if you want to run the background, you don't want the actual window to pop up, you can do that as well. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to do options equals options, and then from here we can add each of the things we want. So we're going to do options.add argument, and the first one we're going to do is -- disable info bars. And what that'll do, that'll get rid of that Chrome is being controlled by WebDriver or whatever, that little bar across the top. The next one we want to do is options.add experimental option, and what we're going to want is prefs, and then a second argument is going to be a dictionary, and what this is going to be is profile.default content settings values .notifications. My spelling is terrible. Notifications. And we're going to set the value to 1. And then we can pass this in the Chrome options argument. We're passing that options item. Whoops. Okay. So save that. And now if we run this, we should not have to deal with that bar. And so we can see we got the info bar is gone, and if we wait a little bit, we should not get that automation tab. Oh. And because that popped up, I must have had a typo, and I think it's because yeah, this is supposed to be setting with no S. So I think that will take care of that next time. For now, we're just going to move on into finding the elements we want to handle. So first thing we're going to go over is how to log in to Reddit. So if we click on this, what we're going to want to do is inspect so we can pull out this information. So this username, we inspect again, we can see that it has an ID of login username. So this is an important thing to keep in mind here for when you're finding elements. Ideally, if you can find an ID tag and use that, that's the best option. In a lot of cases, that won't be available, and you'll have to use something else like a CSS selector. And for some of this stuff, we're gonna have to use the most advanced and the one you should try to use the least, which is Xpath, which is a little more complicated to use, but is also a more powerful feature. So what we're going to do is copy this, and we're just going to save these elements so that we can use them later. So login username is one, and we're also going to want to inspect this, and we see that we have a login password as well. So what that'll allow us to do is find those elements, and then we can interact with them, click on them, type in those fields, and all that stuff. And the final thing is you're going to want to get the sign in button, which we can see this doesn't have an ID. So this is a good example. This doesn't have a class ID, or a CSS ID, so instead we're going to have to use the class name, which is this animated form submit button. So we're going to paste that in as well. And now the next thing we have to do is we're going to go down here, and we're going to select these with Chrome, or select them with Selenium. And I just realized we don't actually have the login button itself. So we have this form data, but we didn't grab the actual login stuff. So if we have to grab that as well. And we can see another good example of a really complicated, this is something that Reddit does and a lot of more popular sites do, is they make it a really non-user friendly CSS class. So instead of being something like login button, we can see it's just this random big string of numbers. But for this, all we have to do is grab this first one so that we have the first CSS class. And that's another thing to keep in mind, is when we go over the find element by CSS tag, you can only use one of these classes. If you know anything about CSS, you can see these spaces. That means it's multiple classes. You can only use, for Selenium, you can only use one class at a time. And in some cases, if one of the first classes is the same as another one, you're gonna have to, that's when you'll have to go into using Xpath, which we'll have to do later as well, and I'll cover that more in detail then. But for now, we can keep it fairly simple. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna do login button, we're gonna do equals to driver dot find element by class name, and it needs to be a string, and then we can bring this in and copy. And what we're going to do is first we're going to print off, so you can get an idea of all the different stuff you can interact with. We're going to do login button, we're going to do dir login button, and this is a Python function which will basically print off all the available properties of this web element. In addition, we're going to do login button dot click, which will open up that pop-up. And also, it's going to create a bug, which I'll explain later. But basically, the issue is that this pop-up form is going to be in an iframe, and we'll have to do a little bit more advanced stuff to access that iframe. But for now, we're going to do username field equals driver dot find element by class name. Actually, this is an ID tag. Element by ID. So this is where we can use login username. That's that tag we got earlier. And you just gotta think about this. It's kind of hard. You don't really think about the step-by-step when you're just using a web page normally. But when you're using Selenium, you have to take it step by step and type everything out so the program knows how to do it. So login button, we're getting that element and clicking on it. That's where we'd click here. And then from there, we need to first, once that form is open, we need to grab the field, click on it, type in it, click on this next field, click on it, type on it. So click out of that. The way we're going to do that is username field.click, and then the final thing to type out our string is going to be username field again dot send keys, and we're just going to put in username. You can use whatever. If you actually want to log in, you can type in your actual login credentials here, and we're going to copy and paste this. And we're just going to change this to password field. And we're going to change, the only thing you have to change really is the ID tag, so it clicks on this new field, and we're just going to do password 123. So we're going to run this now. We are going to get a bug, like I said, because it's built in an iframe, and we'll cover that later. So run this again. Hopefully everything works how we expect it to. Pain will also go later, because you see it's a pain if you are working with stuff. You can see how long it takes to load. It makes, if you have an error in your code, it ends up taking a long time to fix this stuff, which is something you don't really want to mess with. So I'll go over kind of my workflow on how to deal with that stuff. But as we can see, it's not typing this out, and that's because this isn't an iframe, like I said. But the good thing is that we also fixed that typo. We're not getting that notification pop up, and that's because we fixed that typo up here. So that's, we at least on that run we made sure we took care of this. But if we look at our error code, we can scroll up, we can see there's an error with this username find username, or find the login user. So that's right here, and that's because message no such element exists. We know it exists, but Selenium isn't smart enough to find it automatically. What we're gonna have to do is tell it to switch from this main thing to looking at the iframe. So that's what we're gonna do above our code here. So what we're going to do, we're going to get a visual look at exactly what's going on. So when we click this, what we can see if we inspect again is we can hover over this right here, and if we scroll up, we can see right here is the problem, that it's inside this iframe. And basically an iframe is almost like it's kind of like a portal to an entirely different web page. It's like a nested web page. So this is the login. We can see the source of this is the Reddit login page itself. So even though we're on reddit.com, this is basically like a nested version of that login page, and Selenium needs to basically be told to switch over to this. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at the class on this this iframe. And this is a prime example of where we're going to have to use Xpath, because it has both these class names and we want to make sure we get them both. So what we're going to do is copy that, and we're going to just create a comment, paste it there. Basically, we're going to do frame equals, we're going to do driver dot find element by Xpath. And what this allows us to do is, unlike these where we can only have a single ID or class name like this, we can't put a space here and add the second class name, it'll cause an error. So, but with Xpath, what we can do is create our string, we're going to do // and we're going to do iframe, which tells Xpath we're looking for an iframe element, and then inside that we can do contains parentheses, and we're going to do at class, comma, and then we're going to first grab the first class name of this, and then we're going to do and contains again, and we're going to do the second thing. And this is basically a way that allows you to target elements with multiple class names and more advanced configuration. So let's make sure, I think our syntax is good. So that'll grab that frame element, and then we have to switch over. So we're going to do driver.switch to dot frame, and then we're passing that frame object. And what this will allow us to do is then interact with this web page. And we also, while we're at it, we're going to make sure we have that submit button. So submit button equals driver dot find element by class name. Just paste that in. And if you want to submit, we're not going to actually submit it since I'm just putting in dummy text, but you just do submit button dot click. But we're just going to comment this out. So I think if we run this now, it should type our stuff out properly. Just gotta wait for that to load. And this is like I was saying, most websites aren't going to be this involved. Reddit's one of the most popular websites on the planet, basically, so they take a lot of actions to try to prevent people from automating their website. And we can see it works properly. But 90% of websites, you're not going to have to do this much work just to type out a form field. But we can see everything's working properly now. What we didn't go over earlier, as I probably should have, is this dir. So this is what's getting printed out here, and this is something you can keep in mind, is that if you want data from an element, so like what you can see here, we have text, and this is the attribute we're going to use in a little bit to get the post titles. We're going to grab the titles of these posts, and then we're going to print out the text so that it shows up. So that's one example. You can also take a screenshot of an element. You can see the send keys. That's another example. That's what we used here. Yeah, click, all this stuff. So you can mess around with that, but for our purposes, we're just going to use text up next on our next aspect of this little project we're doing. So first thing, again, like I say, is you always want to find your elements before you really start writing any code. So first thing we're going to do is, we can see by default when it opens, it's got these expanded cards. So the first one we're going to do is click on this element so it kind of scrunches it down, it's more visible. So again, same process as usual. What we're going to do is inspect the element and grab whatever tag we can use to identify it. So for this, you can see, and a lot of times another thing is, you can see this is like, there's a lot of nesting. Even though we hover over it, it looks like the same. You want to make sure you get the highest level that you can. So instead of grabbing this element, we're going to want to go up to this button so that we can grab it directly. And you see, again, this is an example where it's got a really intentionally mangled class name, but it also has this ID. So it says layout switch classic. So that makes it really easy for us. We can go back here and create just a multi-line string again. We're going to paste that in. So next, once we've clicked that, what we want to do is grab our post titles. So click here, and we want this. So again, we can see it's nested a little bit. We're going to have to make sure to find this. So if we drill down, let's see. Okay, so it's hidden inside this link. We don't want the link. We don't want this div. We can see that it's inside this h2 class that we can actually get to the text itself. And what we're also going to do is verify that every post title has the same tag, because for all we know, this class right here could be different for every one of them. So let's look at another one of these and make sure that they're all the same. So again, we're going to go down into this, and what we can see is that it's the same. So that makes it easier for us. If they'd given each of these an identical or a unique class name, we would have had to do something a little bit more complicated. But for this, we can just do the same thing we did earlier, where we use an Xpath and we copy and paste. So if we go back into this, we can basically just recopy this Xpath here and replace the class names inside of it. So what we're going to want to do is, first we're going to do that view button so we can get the classic view. Do driver, find element by ID, and just paste this in there. And we have to go recopy this. Do view button dot click. Finally, we can do post. We'll call it post titles because that's what we want. We have to do driver dot find elements, and this is a distinction. If you do find element by Xpath here, it'll only grab the first matching element. What we want is find elements, and this will grab the whole list. It'll grab every item that matches this Xpath. So we're going to paste that in, get rid of those extra commas, and now we can just replace inside these. That's all we got to do, is switch those out. And that's what you should always keep in mind. Always try to, when possible, repeat, save your code when possible. So save that, and then what we're going to do is print those off. So we're going to do post, we're going to do, for Python, a list comprehension, we're going to do print post.text, and then we're going to do for post in post titles. And what this is, if you're not familiar with list comprehensions, it's basically just kind of a shortcut that Python has. Instead of doing a whole for loop like for in post titles, it's kind of like a shorter syntax. So let's run this code and we'll make sure everything's working right. And also, the last thing I'll want to do is show you a way to kind of, if we do get an error, it'll show kind of my workflow, how I use Xpaths to save time. So let's see here. Take a second to load. We'll see if it clicks everything properly. Whoops, up, I know the issue. It's dumb. I didn't. This is all running ahead, so let's get rid of all this. We'll comment that out so that we don't have to waste time with that. Run this again. We'll click out of this. Hopefully everything works properly. But you can see with Selenium, the thing is, between runs, if you get an error, it takes forever to reload the web page. So what I'm going to show us after this runs is basically how you can use the Chrome console to, let's see, failed to log in. What was the issue? I see the issue. We copied and pasted. I didn't change this to H2. So that's a pretty classic example. And this is a good example of why what we're going to do right now is test this. Before I run it, I should have tested it like I normally do, which is if you go in here to our Chrome console, if we open this up before, instead of running and taking 10 seconds for it to reload the web page, we can text our Xpath in here beforehand. So if we do post titles, what we're going to do is to verify that this Xpath works before we run it in our Python code. So if we do $X, this is a shortcut which lets us run Xpath in the browser. So we can see instead of running it, the issue I had earlier was that I forgot to switch out. I copied and pasted that code over, and I had iframe instead of H2. So if we post this, we can see now it works. We can see we got all 27 of these elements, and if we do, so that was just a pretty good example of how when you're copying and pasting code, a basic little error that you didn't realize. So we'll run that again, and it should work this time. But this is probably the best way to verify. So you don't have to run the whole browser. You can test before you run any Xpath. I'd always recommend just running it in the Chrome console. So we can see here, if we wait if everything works properly in this browser, we should get all of our post titles here. And it worked as we expected. So this is an example of how you can use this. You could do this with really any element. For this we just did post titles, but you could also grab the number of upvotes. You could grab all sorts of data, and not just off Reddit. You could use this technique to grab data off of pretty much any website. If you wanted to get information off Google or Amazon, if you want to get listings or see where you're ranking in Google, you could do something like that too. But for this video, that's basically all I wanted to cover. You should feel pretty good about yourself. Like I was saying earlier, this is more advanced than probably 99% of websites you're going to work with. Most of the time you're not going to have to use Xpath or work around Iframes. Iframes are actually pretty rare as far as having to interact with elements on them. So I just want to do something unlike most tutorials where they do the most basic stuff. I want to do more advanced, so you can learn all sorts of different techniques that you might eventually have to use. Because I remember the first time I ran into an iframe, it took me quite a long, probably an hour at least, to figure out why exactly my code wasn't working. So hopefully that saves you a lot of frustration when you're working on your own stuff. But I'll be doing some follow-up videos again in this series. Next video will probably be on actual testing stuff, like Selenium's actually intended to be used. Rather than making bots, it's really meant to test web apps and websites to make sure various features on your website work properly. So in my next video I'll probably go over that, and then follow-up videos I'm going to do how you can use extensions with Selenium, so you can do like an ad blocker. If ads are messing up your script, you can run a extension in the background to block those. We'll also do advanced stuff like action builder chains, and also how to use sessions and users and cookies, so that if you want to stay logged in between sessions when you run your code, you can do that as well. So if you're interested in that, hit subscribe. If this video helped you out, give me a like. But for now, that's it. Thanks.